Welcome to the Maxon booth here at NAB 2018. As Matthias said, my name is Nate Rodriguez-Vera. I'm a freelance digital artist based out of Brooklyn, New York. Normally on the internets, I am known as Some Nerve, so pretty much like all social media, look up at Some Nerve or just go to somenerve.com and I'm there. Today, I'm going to be talking about 3D work for non-technical people. Essentially, my own lazy artist guide to using Cinema 4D commercially. So the intent of this is not to give you like a whole step-by-step walkthrough of following a particular technique, because quite frankly, I don't have any mind-blowing techniques to show you. A lot of the stuff that I do on a daily is stuff that's like readily available, and there are a lot of super talented artists and educators that talk about this online. So instead, this is more aimed towards like people who might just be getting interested in getting into 3D now, or they just got started, and maybe they find it a little bit intimidating, a little scary, right? Because it can get really technical. But I'm here to tell you, like, look, I don't have that much experience. I've been using Cinema 4D for about 2 years, and just with a little bit of hard work, determination, focus. Yeah, right here, well, I'm standing in front of you right now at NAB 2018. It's a little bit surreal. So hopefully by the end of this, it'll serve as a little bit of inspiration, give you an idea of what you might go through yourself as you're going through the paces. And yeah, just basically telling you it's going to be OK. So again, who am I? My name is Nate. Hello. Again, I specialize in 3D illustration, motion graphics, and design. I don't have a formal background in 3D. I don't have a formal background in visual arts at all. I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a graduate studies in music technology. Okay, so that's just to give you an idea that it doesn't matter where you begin. If you use the right tools, specifically Cinema 4D, if you're like really determined to be in this field, then you can achieve that. Anyway, so far, some of the clients that I've worked with are Nike, Zappos, Camper, Perrier, Trident Gum, McCann World Group, Standard Vision, and Splice, among some others. I'm represented in the US by H+ Creative. It's a great full-service agency based out of Los Angeles. The whole roster of artists, we specialize in either 3D or 2D animation, illustration and design, installations, and experiences. And the agency has clients like Nike, Sony, Dropbox, Microsoft, Ford. It's a very long list. So feel free to check out hpluscreative.com and find out more. Okay. So it's real time. Let's go ahead. I'm just going to jump here for a second, and we're going to play a little reel. And then after that, we're just going to do a little bit more talking. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. That was very fun to make, actually. So I think the shortcut is that. Yep. So you just saw the reel, and this is basically comprised of some of my favorite things that I've done both commercially and personally over the past, let's say, few months and over the past year. And again, as I said earlier, this is just to give you an idea of what your trajectory might look like when you get started doing 3D, especially with Cinema 4D. So in the beginning, I was completely oblivious to this whole thing. I was an 18-year-old kid who had picked up a pair of turntables, and I was living the dream. I was like DJing all these like little dingy house parties, and that eventually transitioned into me like beginning to play like larger events, etc. Which then turned into me getting more into studio work, right? Like eventually I wanted to do more music production and also music composition, sound design for film, television, games, all that stuff, right? So, but what happened was while I am DJing and producing music and all that stuff, it started becoming more apparent to me that the relation between music and visual is like really tight. And as a performer or a musician who's getting either playing all these events or getting all these releases maybe in some small labels here and there, you kind of want to have some kind of aesthetic to go with your music. And if you want to call it that, your brand. And I didn't really want to leave it up to someone else to take care of that. I wanted to be able to take control of that. So what did I do? I just taught myself, started teaching myself to use Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, all that stuff. And just mainly having fun with it, right? Like never really taking it too seriously. Again, always like using some kind of like 80s, early 90s aesthetic, because that's my thing. Neon, Miami Vice, all this stuff, right? And again, it was always fun to the extent that eventually music became more like a secondhand thing. It started becoming more my hobby. And then the visual art side of things, it started becoming like my main thing. So eventually, this turns into me going into actual design work. So I start doing a lot of branding for a couple of like different companies. One of these companies was Utami, which was founded by a good friend of mine. They make plugins for software called Ableton Live, which, if you don't know, is kind of the Cinema 4D equivalent in the music production world. And that was great. That was really exciting. At that point, I was like fully in. Visual arts is what I want to do. But then what? Right after a while, I started getting a little restless. I feel like there might be a little bit more to do than to do just 2D work. Right? I think I'd want to do something else, but I just don't know exactly what it is. So I try around a couple things. I actually got it into my head that I could make a game, a video game. That did not go well. Once I realized that I actually had to code and program something, I was like, not for me. Goodbye. In the meantime, I started experimenting with some other 3D software just to be able to create assets for this game. But it really never, it just never really clicked for me. So after a while, I just thought, okay, 3D is not really something that I'm interested in. And I just kind of left it alone. But then I speak to a friend of mine, and he says, like, no, I think you were just going about it the wrong way. Did you try Cinema 4D? And this was 2 years ago, and he says that, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. What's Cinema 4D? What is this? So what he does is he takes me into, I think, like Instagram, Tumblr, I forget, and we start looking at the usual, hashtags that are associated, right? Like hashtag C4D, hashtag everyday, all this stuff. And suddenly I start seeing all this amazing 3D work that people are making. And a lot of these guys and girls, both, already kind of like legendary in the scene, right? They're very well known, and I even remember myself seeing some of their art before and being like, wow, that's so cool. I wonder how I can do that in Photoshop. And the answer is I can't, because I needed to use like Cinema 4D or some 3D software. So I have Creative Cloud. Through After Effects, I have access to Cinema 4D Lite. So I start taking a stab at it. And immediately, here we go. So hashtag C4D, hashtag everyday, hashtag first one, hashtag here we go. And I mean, it's not quite a masterpiece or anything, but there was a sense of pride, right? It was for the very first time I got into 3D and it started making sense. So I was like, okay, there's something here. There's something here. I think we can make something happen. And I just want to show you the scene file for this because, again, it's so bare bones. It's so simple. And all I'm using is merely primitives, right? This is just a cube object. Maybe if I just change the display mode to hidden lines, it might be a little easier to tell. So just a cube object, flattened it out, gave it some round edges, took like a cone object, gave it a bend deformer, included a bunch of like little spline sweeps as the leaves for the palm tree, using this one little sphere as the sun. And I'm not really good with the concept of a sky or background just yet, so I'm literally just putting a plane behind it as my background, and a single point light right in the middle, lighting everything. And I think this is going to look great. And I go ahead and I render it. It's like, oh, well, it's going to have to do. It's OK. First one, we know it. Let it go. But then, and this is the wonder of Cinema 4D, I do get hooked. I am hooked. Literally every day I am going at it. So a year after, I start seeing a bit of an improvement. And then another year later, then you can definitely see an improvement from this to that. And also a lot of the things that you see in the reel that are kind of like in between the first and second year, right? And this is basically just testament to how Cinema 4D was crucial in this. And even if I show you the scene file for one of these more recent ones, let me see if I can go here and show you that. You'll actually notice that the scene file itself, the object manager, is not even that much more complicated than the original one. But I have a different understanding of what it is to build a scene, a different understanding of composition, a different understanding of lighting and materials that I didn't have a year ago, 2 years ago, et cetera. And that's one of the beauties of Cinema 4D. You just learn as you go, and you learn very quickly. So if I show you how this looks rendered out again, and I'm using Redshift as my render of choice. I mean, I change it up depending on project. But recently, over the past year or so, I've been mostly using Redshift. It's very fast. It's very stable. And for that reason, it's been kind of a no-brainer for me. I've just loved it. So, but again, you can see if you compare what's actually going on in the scene in terms of geometry, there's really not that much going on. And a lot of the work is being done by the lighting, the materials being used, et cetera, right? And I'm a sucker for simplicity. If I can keep something extra simple and just use lighting and materials to just bring out like the cool factor of it, then great, my work is done. So the point being, and I know you please forgive me for the very bad pun, right? So I'm saying like from 0 to 40, right? It's more 40 miles per hour, but really it's Cinema 4D. It's bad, I know. But anyways, from 0 to 40 in 2 years. Why? How did that happen? And the top point is that it's just artist friendly. As opposed to like a lot of the other 3D packages, it just kind of made sense for someone who was coming from, let's just say, more traditional 2D art. As soon as you jump into it, of course, you have to learn a little bit about 3D. You're adding another dimension. But still, it makes sense. And that allows you to create and iterate a lot faster and a lot more often. And more creation, more iteration means that you learn faster, too. Also, there's a bunch of great add-ons and plugins that you can use with it. There's X particles if you want to expand the particle generation capabilities. As you saw, there's Redshift, there's Octane, there's Cycles 4D for rendering, URender as well, which is just being shown off right here. And they all still kind of follow that same artist-friendly, accessible, just workflow that has made Cinema 4D so crucial for people like myself, or maybe like you, who's maybe not necessarily extremely technically inclined, but still wants to be able to like work in this, right? Like still has fun and still wants to do more. So I do take pride, even though I normally don't like to get too deep into the technical stuff, I do take pride in teaching myself most things. But inevitably, you're going to hit some kind of roadblock, some kind of wall. You're going to be like, OK, I figured out how to do this up until this point, but I don't know how to do this other thing past this point. And that's what was brilliant about the Cinema 4D community, is that, first of all, it's huge. There's so much knowledge out there on the internet related to Cinema 4D and how to do pretty much anything with Cinema 4D. but also the approachability was also extremely interesting because it was something that I hadn't noticed from any other packages in any other field. And again, so if you hit a roadblock, I could go to Cineversity, I could go to Grayscale Gorilla, I could go to Brograph, I could go to iDesign, or I could literally go on YouTube and search for something, and I would find the answer right away. And that was brilliant. I don't think that's something that you can see for pretty much like anything, except for Cinema 4D. There's also the forums, Cinema 4D Cafe, Creative Cow, etc. Just the sources are endless, and they're a huge part in just accelerating the learning. And then, of course, we like to roll our eyes at it. It's the hashtag everyday thing. It's silly, right? Everyone goes on Instagram, as like makes their like daily Cinema 4D thing, puts it up, hashtag everyday, hope I get like 1,000 likes, right? It's okay. It's a little silly, but quite frankly, if you look beyond that, it's an amazing way to train yourself to get better at something. You're sitting down every day, you're making art every day, and you can clearly see, again, if I go back, this is the very first thing I put up, and then I kept going, if not every day, almost every day, and then I'm at a point where I'm making like markedly better art. So I know it's silly, but I don't like to knock it as much anymore because I see the value in it. So what's happening, right? So we're doing the everyday stuff and putting stuff on Instagram, putting stuff on Tumblr, putting stuff on Facebook, putting stuff on Twitter, and eventually clients start coming your way. And maybe if you're like me, you get all like excited and like, yes, I'll do work for you. Yes, I'll work with you. Yes, I'll work with you. Yes, with you. And suddenly I'm like, oh no, wait, what did I do? Now I have all these like multiple clients that I agreed to work with. I still have a full-time job. I have a personal life to think about too. This is me just like sitting on a giant fidget spinner, like holding my head, being like, oh my God, this is terrible. What have I done? I have to think about deadlines. And then do I have to model something? Do I have to rig something? Run simulations, texturing, think about render times, revisions. What did I do? But fret not. There's a way to get around it. There's a way to deal with it. And I'll tell you how I was able to do it, and maybe it'll help you. First off, I'm going to talk about some of the projects that I was working on around this time. One of those projects was for Camper. Camper is a footwear brand based out of Spain. And they reached out to me last summer saying, like, hey, you know, we want to launch our spring-summer 2018 campaign. There's a lot of like new products that we're coming out with. And we like the aesthetic that you're using. We want to go for this kind of like future retro, late 80s, early 90s vibe, and kind of like minimalist, geometric, all this stuff. So let's figure something out. I'm like, OK, sure, let's do it. So the project consisted of two parts. Part one was to make a hero image. And looks a little jagged, I guess, because of the compression. But basically, this was going to be a hero image that would serve dual purposes. For starters, it was going to be used as wallpaper in their Paris flagship store during the launch event. So here it actually is. This is their store, and this is the wallpaper. And then it was also going to serve as the cover art for their lookbook, which, by the way, I have here. I'll pass it out. You guys can pass it around if you'd like. There's a bunch of them. Take a look. So it was going to serve as a cover for this lookbook, which in turn inside has all these images, basically portraying their new product range for spring and summer 2018, incorporated into some kind of 3D environment, right? Following the same vibe, kind of like future retro, a little minimalist, kind of kitschy, etc. So these are, basically it was like 15 images and animations because they also wanted animations that they could play during the event and all these screens. And this was supposed to be done in like 2 weeks. So it was, at first I took it on and then I realized how much work it was going to be, and then I started going into panic mode. I was like, what am I doing? Why did I say yes to this? You're crazy. But I'm going to talk about shortly how I addressed it. Right now, I just kind of want to give you the overview of the whole project and some of the other projects I was working on. And then we'll jump into specifics, and I'll show the Cinema 4D files. OK. So these are some of the images. And again, I'm passing around the lookbook, so you'll also be able to see them printed out. Another project that I was working on at the same time was for Trident Gum. In this case, McCann World Group, which is the ad agency that manages Trident, reached out to me saying like, hey, you know, we want you to work on something with us. They had a pretty solid storyboard already for what they wanted to happen, but they also kind of like left it open. It's like, we still want you to give it your own touch. The guidelines were simply keep it semi-simple, but make it colorful, make it kind of magical, make sure that the Trident packages are always in sight. They're the center of attention. Oh, and make it seamless. It has to be a completely seamless 15-second TV spot. So make sure of that. No cuts, no hard cuts, nothing like that. So I'll show you how that came out, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Ahora Trident es toda una explosión de sabor. Busca su variedad de sabores. Nuevo Trident, sabor y empaque bien por encima.
Right. So obviously, as you noticed, that was made for Trident's Spanish-speaking audience. But I think we get the point, right? That was one of the other project that I would like to talk about, but I'm afraid that maybe we're a little short on time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to skip ahead, and if by the time I'm done talking about the other ones, if there's still time, then I'll roll back around and talk a little bit more about Perrier. So, again, I'm taking care of Perrier, I'm taking care of Trident, I'm taking care of Camper, I'm taking care of a full-time job. It's like, so how am I not losing my mind? Well, there's basically just 5 little things that I tell myself, and they might help you. Your 5 things or your 10 things, however they are, might vary a little bit, but to me, they were extremely helpful. And the overarching idea is that, you know, we work hard, right? Because like I like to joke around, oh, we're all artists, we're lazy, but that's not the truth. We spend a lot of hours like working on this, whether it's on the technical side or whether it's maybe I'm not so technical, but I do spend a lot of time thinking about the creative direction of something. So working hard, but in reality, mostly smart. And there's like these like 5 things that I tell myself. Like number 1, keep it simple and procedural. So I'm going to jump into Cinema 4D now. And even this one is a pretty good example of that, but I just actually want to show you the hero image that was made for Camper, which is, again, Camper reached out to me and they said, like, we like the simplicity and the minimalness of some of the work that you've been doing, so let's roll with that. And that was fantastic, because like that was going to save a lot of time in terms of like dealing with techniques and creating some kind of like complex structures or simulations. No, I kept it simple. This is all basically made up of basic geometry or primitives, right? So these are these objects that you can get here from these little panes, and you can create cubes, pyramids, spheres, etc. And using a combination of that and Booleans, and if you don't know what Boolean operators are, is basically you can combine 2 or more shapes to either create a more complex shape or take out, let's just say, cutouts from that shape. So this is a perfect example, this little triangle here, which is, you know, this kind of like retro, early 90s triangle with a hole. And I'm using this Boolean operator to do that. And simply, I just have this cylinder. So if I turn off the Boolean operator, you can see, maybe if I click away from my camera momentarily, that this is what we have. Whoa. Again, it's just a cylinder going through this triangle here. But once I activate the Boolean operator and making sure that it's set to A subtract B, I'm just subtracting from that structure and just creating like a newer structure with maybe just a little bit more visual interest. Of course, the expert modelers will scoff at this because they say like you never want to be using Booleans and stuff like that. But it's fine. It worked. That's all that matters. So again, when speaking of the procedural nature, I'm speaking more in terms of like the texturing. So if I go here to Redshift and render it out, you can see that the textures I'm using are fairly simple. And on the floor here is essentially a procedural texture. And again, when I say procedural, it's kind of like saying like allow the machine to do a lot of the grunt work, right? instead of like having to go into, say, like Photoshop or Illustrator and draw this whole grid of lines, so I have this gridded floor texture. Instead, Cinema 4D already has all these great procedural textures that it generates for you. Use them. And that's going to save you a lot of time. You still have to do a little bit of creative direction, choosing the right colors, choosing the right scaling, but you're still saving yourself a lot of time. Same thing applies to, I don't know if it's that visible here, but I think you can notice, right, so this is supposed to look like some kind of like old plaster or cement structure. I think you can see a little bit of kind of like these wear patterns. And of course, one thing I could have done was to like draw all these like textures to make it look like it's worn out. But again, that's so time consuming. Cinema 4D already has all these great noise patterns that it generates for you. And you can go through different seeds of them, and you can just like go in them and like tweak them in certain ways. Why not just take advantage of that? Let it do all the grunt work. All you have to do is then just like tweak it, color correct it a little bit, and then just get these wear patterns that you want. So that gives, again, the scene just a little bit more interest. And it looks a little bit maybe like more realistic. So it's all not just like flat all the time. Okay. So that was one of the first points. So keep it simple and procedural. That's what I tell myself whenever I start a new project. Can I do this? Or I ask myself, can I do this? The next point is, again, working hard, mostly smart. Pick the right tools and also the right materials. And to illustrate this, I'm going to jump into the Trident project. Okay. And I also want to show you the Trident video again, just for reference.
Ahora Trident es toda
Let me just pause it and scroll forward to this part here. So I'm going to show you this micro scene. So again, Trident said, like, look, we do want this to be fully seamless. But if I made just one scene with absolutely everything, it was going to become extremely unmanageable. So what I did instead, like each one of these different package scenes, they're actually just separate Cinema 4D micro scenes that then, I made sure that the first one ends where the next one begins. I took it into After Effects, spliced it together, and that was the final product. So again, it looks seamless, but in reality, it's like fake seamless. But I want to talk about this specific micro scene because I think it illustrates a couple of my points. As you can see, there's like these like little pieces of watermelon falling, and then they combine with these splashes of water to then create this beautiful, delicious package of Trident gum in watermelon flavor, right? So what did I do here? So I thought, okay, if I want to have all these pieces of watermelon, if I want to go the hard way, I could create all these little individual pieces and place them in the scene and spend hours doing that and figuring out how to get it done. But instead, and I think it's been mentioned throughout the day today, because I think it's a big part of using Cinema 4D, why not use cloners, right? And again, what a cloner does is, let me just click away from my camera to illustrate that. As the name implies, it clones, right? It takes a piece of geometry, whatever it is, an object, and creates clones of it based on some kind of pattern that you choose. And then when I combine this cloner with, say, something that's called a random effector, which in turn randomizes the position and rotation of the watermelon slices, that way it's a little bit more natural, then at least I have the beginnings of something that might be interesting, right? So again, picking the right tools. So then the next thing is, okay, so how do I make sure that these pieces of a watermelon are falling and bumping against each other and other objects in the scene? I could try and keyframe all of that and animate all of that, but why would I want to do that? That makes absolutely no sense. I'm going to spend hours doing that. Why not instead take advantage of Cinema 4D's dynamic system and basically tell Cinema 4D, like, hey, all these little pieces of watermelon in this cloner, see them as individual objects that are affected by physics, meaning suddenly they're being affected by gravity, they're being affected, well, they're colliding against each other, they're colliding against other objects, so that then when I hit play, all I have to do is hit play, and then they just fall and just crash against each other and crash against other objects. And that's it. I save myself a lot of time from having to keyframe all these animations, which would have probably taken forever. Okay? So the next part is, okay, so I got the watermelon part down. how am I going to deal with the water splashes that are coming in? And again, here's the concept of using the right tools. As I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of great add-ons and plugins that are made for Cinema 4D. One of those is X-Particles. Quite frankly, one of my favorite plugins in Cinema 4D. Great particle simulations, fluid simulations, smoke and fire simulations. If you're using Cinema 4D, it's going to be one of those plugins that become essential. You're going to have to get at some point. So without going too far into the details of how this is done, because like this could be a whole topic in itself, basically I use X-Particles to create a fluid simulation, which then I have it cached, so we don't have to like recalculate everything. So then, if I hit play, and my scene is moving, you can see that now we have our pieces of watermelon, and we have this, well, what looks right now like a really crazy sludge, almost like venom or something. But that's just because like it's not really showing up in the viewport properly, let's just say. And also because, yeah, this brings me to the next point. You have to think about the materials that you're using, right? I have it here in my Redshift render view. And you can see that because in contrast to the viewport, I'm using a material that actually resembles water, so it looks like water coming in. Of course, I could go into this material here, and I could say, OK, what if I wanted, instead of it being water, I want it to be liquid gold for some odd reason? Then here we go, right? I mean, and I'm not going to jump into like too many specifics about how the Redshift material system works. I'm just trying to illustrate a point. Picking the right materials is going to go a long way in determining how your scene looks, how it's perceived by the client, by the viewers, etc. So always just be conscious of that. I'm going to keep this scene open because I want to illustrate the next point, which is let someone else do the grunt work. This is my other, let's say, guideline to working hard, but mostly smart. And what do I mean by that? If you look at these like little watermelon slices, they're like, pretty realistic looking, right? They're pretty, and maybe it's easier to illustrate it here. These are essentially very realistic pieces of watermelon that are textured with just the right way, so they look real, right? As real as possible. And I had the option to just model it out myself. I could have gone, maybe modeling out the watermelon wouldn't have been that difficult. But what was I going to do about the texturing? Am I just supposed to go down to the grocery store, buy a watermelon, slice it up, take a bunch of pictures? I don't have time for that. So instead, again, the whole concept, let other people do the grunt work. This means there's all these marketplaces online like TurboSquid, CG Trader, Polygon, Megascans. There are people who dedicate themselves literally to creating models and to creating textures that you can buy to use in your commercial projects. And it turns into a win-win situation because, well, they're getting paid for their work, and they're helping you get paid faster because you're working faster. So again, perfectly symbiotic. Do it, take advantage of it. And I feel like at first I was like really kind of like resistant to that because no, I want to make everything from scratch. I take pride in that. But when time is of the essence, you can't be thinking about that. You just have to move very quickly. So again, assets, don't be afraid to use them. They're there to help you. So again, I follow all these like guidelines. Keep it simple. Pick the right tools. Let someone else do the grunt work. But inevitably, you're going to have to get your hands dirty at some point. Meaning, you can't always get around having to model something or texture something from scratch. There are projects or there are parts of a project that will require you to really just jump in there and do the whole work yourself. And again, I'm going to jump into Cinema 4D to illustrate this. Another scene from the Trident project. In this case, I'm using what Trident wanted was for this package to come into the scene and just kind of open up and close just to kind of like show off their new packaging, right? Because like this is a new packaging they're really proud of. They want people to know like, hey, our packaging is different now. And I'm like, OK. So in this case, there was no other way around it. I was going to have to create a model of this package from scratch, and I was also going to have to rig it. And by rigging, what I mean is I'm creating all these little joints that in turn help me turn this otherwise inanimate object into something that I can animate, right? And when we think rigging, if you're not familiar with it, you think of, okay, creating joints and a skeleton for, say, a human figure to be animated or an animal to be animated. But no, it can be used for anything really that requires some kind of animation. So, for example, a package of gum. So again, I'm taking these like joints that I created, and then if I hit R, then I can go ahead and just like move this little handle and then make it look like the package is opening and closing. And of course, I'm just keyframing all those animations so that in the end, again, it just comes in, opens up, and flies up, right? So again, just getting your hands dirty when you have to. It's going to be inevitable. At some point, you'll have to just do the work. Same thing applies to the texturing. Right now, like the tiling looks a little strange in the viewport. But if I go to my render view, again, you'll see that the texturing is fine. It does look like an actual Amazon Trident package. I'm sorry. Again, this took a little bit of work because I had to like model out the entire package from scratch. Then I had to make sure that the textures lined up. For this, I actually had to go to the grocery store, buy a bunch of packages of Trident, open them up, flatten them out, take all these pictures, bring them to Photoshop, edit them out, and then bring them to Cinema 4D, adjust the scaling, adjust the positioning, and then after a little bit of work, then it wound up looking like that. So those are the first 4 points. So again, keeping it simple, pick the right tools and materials, let someone else do the grunt work, meaning use assets, get your hands dirty when you have to because you are going to have to. There's no way around it. And there's the 5th point. And to me, this point is so important. And for us working in 3D and in this industry, I think it's like one of the most important things that I decided to make it its own slide. I don't know if how many of you have seen this movie, but when I was in my teens, and I'm aging myself a little bit here, I thought the movie The Waterboy was the most hilarious thing ever. I haven't seen it in many years. It probably won't even hold up. If I see it again, I'm probably going to think it's really bad. But there was one line out of that movie that I always thought was so hilarious, not just the delivery, but like the message behind it. And it was this line, which is, "What mama don't know won't hurt her." And what does that mean for us in this industry, right? As designers, as motion designers, animators, all this stuff. Well, let's go back to Cinema 4D, and I think I'll be able to illustrate it a lot better. So I'm going to pick another project. I'm actually going to jump back into Camper. So this was one of the scenes that was made for Camper. And again, I'm just like showing you the Redshift render view because I don't want to ruin it for you just yet. Right? So, but the point I'm trying to make is this. When I was working with Camper, right, the requirements were to create these 8,000 pixel by 8,000 pixel images that could then be printed into their lookbook, right? And as I said before, incorporating like all these new shoe models. And look, I wasn't really going to have the time to create 15 3D models for all 15 shoes and create all these 15 scenes that were going to be both made for stills and also for animations in 2 weeks. It was going to be impossible. There was no way for me to do it. So I think about it, okay, so literally the only thing they care about is what's confined within this square. This is all they see, and as soon as they get it and they say, looks good, it's like, awesome, your work is done. So whatever's happening all the way off camera to the left, all the way off camera to the right, or up, or down, or anywhere else, they don't have to know. Well, they're going to know now, probably, if they're watching. But normally, they don't have to know. Their viewers don't have to know. If they're happy with the image, your work is done. And maybe I'm not making it that obvious yet, but if I go ahead and click on my camera here, and basically this is just going to switch my perspective, you'll see what I'm talking about. Boom. So again, I'm a little embarrassed to be showing you this, but it's just to prove a point, right? as long as, because in the end, what we're doing here is we're creating optical illusions for them, right? That's all we're doing. That's all the 3D work is. It's optical illusions. And as long as the illusion, again, I'm going to switch back to my perspective camera. Looks fine. They thought it looked fine. The optical illusion is complete. They're happy with it. That's great. They're not going to get this file. They're not going to be able to click on that button and see that all what I did was, to avoid having to model out these shoes, was take these literally 2 planes and put the textures on them from these product shots that they had. And I just said, OK, I'll just build a scene around them. And I'll just, of course, you still have to put in the work. You have to think about the right camera perspective. You have to think of the right focal length. You have to think of all these details. But I saved myself so much time. I was actually able to finish the project by doing this. And if you even want to laugh a little bit more, if I rotate my camera a little further, you can see like how much more terrible it gets as the camera continues to pan around and change perspective, right? But again, optical illusion, all they see is this. And this to them looks great. They're happy. They're said, OK, great. Send it out to the printers. Done. And I'm breathing a sigh of relief. I'm so happy that I didn't have to tell them, like, hey, guys, I don't think I'm going to be able to finish this. I'm sorry. It was all delivered on time. They were happy campers, no pun intended. And I was happy as well. I'll use another one of the camper scenes just to illustrate it again. Here's another one. Again, I'm going to show you first the rendered version. The illusion is there, but I think I already spoiled it for you, so you guys already know where I'm going with this. It's like, so from here, the perspective looks fine. In this like square area, it all looks good. Anything that's happening outside of it, not their problem. But again, let's see what happens when I click away from my camera. Suddenly, the illusion is broken. It is not a 3D model of a shoe. It is literally a cutout of a shoe that is placed in just the right way, using just the right perspective, so, again, so that people think that that's what's happening. And again, I can even like just zoom farther away to continue breaking the illusion for you. And I'm trying to keep this PG, but I use this little sensor bar, so at least we're not messing up here. So, but again, the illusion is all that matters. If I keep zooming away, so again, this is also a good way to see it. Go back to my perspective camera. All is great. This is our figure lying down on this cushy surface in front of a very vast ocean, in front of a very vast sky. It's great. And then you click away from it, and it's literally just this. But again, they don't know that. Well, now they know. But they didn't know that when the project was finished. They were happy with it, sent it out to the printers. It's on the lookbook now, which is still being passed around, I think, and the job was done. So, again, this is to me such an important point that it was just the one final thing that I wanted to say. I wanted to make it its own thing. Just always think about that, because if you're stressing over something, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know how I'm going to be able to like finish this project in this short amount of time. Think about how you can exploit perspective to your advantage. I think that's the biggest thing, and that's the biggest takeaway. We're creating, again, optical illusions. Create it, and don't break it until you're at NAB and talking about it, and then it's broken, right? But otherwise, don't tell your client. It's all good. Tell them that you spent a bunch of hours working on it, and man, these 3D models took so long to make. They don't have to know. Again, my name is Nate Rodriguez-Vera. You can find me on the internet as via somenerve.com or as @somenerve. Thanks so much to Maxon for having me over. This has been a surreal experience. Thanks so much to all of you for being here. Thanks to the people watching online. Yeah, thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your week.